I have been asked why I'm having a bat mitzvah. I am of a generation of women who were not given the opportunity. The first woman to be bat mitzvah was in 1856 in the USA, and she wasn't even allowed to touch the Torah. And I was not in 1954, when I had a Jewish confirmation. There were still women, even in this community, who were hesitant about holding the scroll at Simchat Torah. There is a tradition to formally read from the scroll again every 13 years after the age of 70. And so this seemed to be the correct year for me to do so. And although I have read the scroll before, I also want to take the opportunity to be formally recognized in this way and to show that women can take their place as equals. As I prepared for this bat mitzvah, I wondered what this portion had to say to me, and I looked back at the path that led me to this point. I am here taking part in this service, even as I try to understand what it means for me. The young people from the religion school, Rimon, who taught the service last week, articulated my thoughts. What is the meaning when we pray? And who will hear the words we say? And I still ask this question, even as I stand here. I remember as a student standing in the synagogue one Yom Kippur and wondering why the congregation were there talking to a cupboard at the front of the hall. And I know that I've gone through stages where the synagogue has meant nothing to me, and other times when I know I'm part of a community who support each other and tell me where I belong. And my thoughts today turn to reflect on my family history, to try to understand what has brought me to this point. I am the fourth generation of my family to have been born in a different country from her parents. And I was born here because my parents were able to move here from Germany in 1933. I look back over the generations of ancestors who moved to escape or for a better economic life or to be allowed a secular education. UK, Germany, Kolomia in Bukovina, Chernivtsi in Ukraine. And yet through all this, they retained the knowledge that they had Jewish ancestors and passed it on not just to me and my sister, but to two more generations who sit here today. And I ask, who of these generations kept a kosher household? Was kashrut of any importance or help to maintain their Jewishness? I grew up without any awareness of kashrut. I have not created a home where kashrut matters to me, and yet I find myself reading this portion which tells of the creatures on land and water which should not be eaten. My father told me that he understood that these instructions were written when it was hard to keep some animals clean. Maimonides said, the principal reason why the law forbids swine's flesh is to be found in the circumstance that its habits and its food are very dirty and loathsome. But he also said the best meat is that of animals permitted to be used as food. No doctor has any doubts about this. But my medical father also told me that kashrut is not needed as we have better hygiene and medicine. Others have said that kashrut limits the contact of Jews from their non-Jewish neighbors and keeps the community together. In small shtetls in Eastern Europe, I get the impression that the Jewish communities did stay socially separate from the wider community, or their meeting in the marketplace. To what extent was it kashrut that prevented too much mixing? Or was it the laws of the state that prevented mixing, or the need to have a separate identity? And I question what sort of separation we want to see today. My Litvak maternal grandmother was highly regarded in the small town in Sweden to which she and my grandfather had moved and brought up their 6 children. The last photo we have of her is of her presence at the church service for Santa Lucia, thus showing her support for the local non-Jewish community amongst whom she lived. Her non-Jewish neighbors were careful to serve food acceptable to her when she visited them. It was this Litvak grandmother who did keep a kosher household. The one piece of china that still survives in Denmark is a plate from her Pesach cookery. Yet, reading that England was starving after the Second World War, she sent us a salted ham, the only meat that could survive the sea journey. And she knew that saving life was a higher mitzvah than keeping the laws of kashrut. When my mother, after a 7-year wartime separation from her parents, took me for the first time to visit them, my grandmother served a milk meal. But I, a fussy 7-year-old, wanted meat, and my amazing grandmother felt the need to spoil me. I can still see the slice of wurst resting on the edge of the milchig plate so that it would not contaminate the china. She didn't explain to me that a rabbinic interpretation of the kashrut laws permitted this. In a poor community, it was necessary to avoid wastage, so the rabbis taught that a minimal contamination did not require throwing away the plate. As my Litvak grandfather wrote when discussing the temporary sale of chametz, of food that is not eaten during Pesach, a Jew finds a way to obey the biblical or rabbinic law, but also to live in a modern way. He had been educated in a yeshiva in Lithuania, and newly married at 18, went with his wife to Sweden for a better life with more education for his children. He started as a peddler around southern Sweden, only returning home for Shabbat. When traveling, there were no facilities to eat kosher, but just occasionally he was given a chicken, which he could himself slaughter, so he could keep kosher when he was away, because he had learned how to do it at the yeshiva. I didn't have any awareness myself of kashrut as I was growing up. I do not believe that my paternal grandparents, whom I never met, observed much, if any, kashrut. I only experienced Jewish food in relation to festivals, such as matzah at Pesach. I went to cheder at the local synagogue when the teacher's focus was on the boys, although they were badly treated there. And eventually I refused to continue and arrived at Edgware Reform Synagogue when it was led by Rabbi Ignaz Maybaum. Still not attending synagogue services, I enjoyed the Hebrew classes, and together with 4 other girls had a confirmation on a Sunday at the age of 16. No touching of the scrolls for girls. Only the boys had bar mitzvahs. I became a post-confirmation assistant teacher, and with 2 other girls was sent by the community to the Reform Synagogue summer school held over a long Whitsun weekend, an experience that changed my life. I joined the nearest youth club at Eilith and went to every residential weekend I could. And it was then, as a teenager, when I was again in Sweden, that I told my grandfather about my excitement about benching, singing the grace after meals, and marking the end of Shabbat by Havdalah, thus using my Hebrew for a meaningful religious purpose. I remember him saying that if he had had the chance, he would have chosen to become a progressive Jew himself, but instead he remained a mainstay of the small synagogue in Karlstad. It was only after Lynette was born that my husband Brian and I moved nearer to a liberal synagogue, and we started attending services, and that I became a Jew who observed more rituals. And it was Lynette who brought the custom of benching to our household from the Kadima summer school and reminded me of my youth. But I still did not observe kashrut, despite Brian's continued avoidance of forbidden foods. This bat mitzvah has caused me to ask what is meant by kashrut How and why was it developed, and what living a kosher life might mean today? The words I read from the Torah specified the features of all creatures of land and water that may be eaten and are clean, and then specifically mentioned those creatures that fail to satisfy the rules, are unclean and therefore banned. And what is meant by the terms clean and unclean? The commentators say it is not about animals that need to be washed, it's about ritual purity. It is to avoid bringing evil to the individual touching or eating them, first described in connection with the priests of the temple, but then to the whole community. And this is also made clear by the term an abomination. Does the food we eat matter because of the words of Torah and the statement that Adonai has commanded it? Is it about maintaining health for the people or the world? Nowadays, farming has become a business. Chickens are farmed in bulk, prepared for the market in bulk, and the remnants land up in our rivers, killing the natural life and destroying the wildlife which should be there. Is it time to change our understanding of kashrut? Should we be giving up animals completely and going vegan? Should we be thinking about the welfare and fairness for workers who care for, who grow, who packet the food that we eat? If we are eating specific types of food today, is it to protect our health? Should we also be thinking about life on this planet? Kashrut in the past has seemed to me to be about identity, but I've seen it is also about separateness for holiness. It hasn't been part of my Judaism, but the process of exploring this portion for my bat mitzvah has challenged me to think about what Judaism does mean to me, and to think about the purpose of the rituals around food. And I ask about ethics around the food we eat, about protecting the world, and about my understanding and practice of ethical living. I wouldn't be here today without my teachers, Rabbi Maybaum, who taught me and got me involved, Rabbi Andrew Goldstein, who was so important as I brought up my children and who encouraged my study of Hebrew, and this synagogue where I am bat mitzvah today. But in particular, I must thank Brian, who has supported me in this endeavor, as have all the younger members of my extended family, who I think are here as a red line, as a whip. But also the descendants of my grandparents as they continue to take an interest in their Jewish heritage. And I thank also, especially, those who have taught me and helped me and talked this over with me, Rabbi Alex today, and some of the young people who have heard this and modified it for me and helped me as they continue to do. So I'm very pleased to be here and appreciate also, I'm delighted for the people who are not here. I'm not delighted that they are not here, but I am very pleased to know that I'm supported and so many people who can't be here for all sorts of reasons, I hope are listening as well. Shabbat Shalom.